Morning in Solterra City began with the smell of rain on marble and the sound of perfection rehearsing itself. Carriages hummed, drivers called, fountains performed. It was the kind of morning that looked expensive even before the sun had fully committed to showing up. Inside Gray & Co., the main floor buzzed. Assistants carried fabric swatches, lighting charts, and enough coffee to power a small rebellion. The Celestia Circle Gala was a week away, and Margaret Gray's voice moved through the space like music, calm, exact, impossible to ignore. Elena Draven paused by the entrance, catching her breath and her courage. She'd come straight from another tedious breakfast of family expectations and subtle manipulation. The minute she crossed Gray & Carpenter's threshold, the air felt lighter, scented with paint, wood polish, and possibility. "Miss Draven," called a young assistant, tripping slightly under the weight of a color board. "Mrs. Gray's in the West Wing, finalizing the placement plan." "Of course she is," Elena murmured, smiling. "Margaret probably finalizes the weather if she finds it indecisive." The West Wing looked more like controlled chaos than work. Sketches covered every table. Miniature models of the exhibit space lined the wall. Margaret Gray stood at the center, immaculate in a charcoal suit, giving instructions to 3 designers at once while flipping through a list of names. "Elena," Margaret said without turning, "tell me, do you think red velvet or ivory silk says enlightened patronage with subtle hints of awe?" Elena blinked. "Neither. I'd go with lighting that hides the donors when they get bored." Margaret finally turned, the faintest smile curling her lips. "That's why I like you. You tell the truth before I can even decide whether I want to hear it." They shared a brief laugh, the kind only 2 women fluent in diplomacy and exhaustion could share. Margaret waved off the designers and handed Elena a clipboard. "We've had a small change in fortune. The Solterra exhibit has been elevated. A new sponsor came forward. We're renaming it the Celestia Circle Gala. Same event, better funding, more press, and considerably more drama." Elena skimmed the papers. "So we just pretend this was always the plan?" "Exactly. Pretend elegantly." Margaret adjusted a page. "And of course, the new venue is larger. The Solaris Hall in Central Solterra, better acoustics, worse parking." Elena grinned. "As long as the art still breathes." "That's the idea?" Margaret's gaze softened. "Art must still breathe, even when surrounded by people who mistake breathing for performance." Elena looked at her, half amused, half admiring. Margaret Gray carried elegance like armor, but there was warmth under every line of command. Working beside her felt like standing near a fireplace that also gave business advice. "So who's the mystery sponsor?" Elena asked. "Anonymous," Margaret said lightly, flipping another page. "You hate anonymous." "I do." Margaret's tone held the smallest glimmer of humor. "But this one's reliable. They've backed an artist I've been watching for some time." Elena raised an eyebrow. "One of the new names on the list." Margaret tapped the clipboard. "Ethan Hawthorne, from Virelia." Elena's pulse jumped. She recognized the name from the stack of profiles last week, the painter whose work looked alive even in photographs. "Self-taught, right? His cityscapes looked like they were breathing." "That's him." Margaret's smile was secretive. "He doesn't know it yet, but the gala might change his life." Something in her tone made Elena curious. "You sound almost protective." "I believe in potential," Margaret said, "especially when the world is too busy curating credentials to notice it." Elena studied her for a moment. There was a shimmer of something unreadable behind those calm gray eyes. Maybe nostalgia, maybe strategy. "Will he be attending?" "If he accepts the invitation," Margaret replied. "I sent it through the official channels this morning. His name will be announced publicly in 2 days." Elena nodded, pretending her interest was purely professional. Inside, a spark flared. a mix of intrigue and anticipation. The bridge painter, she thought. I wonder what kind of person paints cities like prayers. Margaret snapped her fingers to get an assistant's attention. Also, we need to update the press kit. Make sure the statement reads, "Formerly the Solterra exhibit, the Celestia Circle Gala now reflects an expanded collaboration under Gray and Comber and the Solterra Cultural Council." We sound important when we use long names. Elena chuckled. You already sound important when you breathe. That's practice, Margaret said smoothly. Importance is just confidence that hired a tailor. They both laughed, an easy, genuine sound that echoed through the organized chaos. For a brief moment, the grandeur of Solterra City felt almost human. Margaret gestured toward the model of Solaris Hall. Walk with me. I want your opinion on the floor plan. They moved together through the scaled-down version of the hall. Margaret explained where each artist's work would be displayed, her voice brisk but melodic. When she reached Ethan's assigned space, a modest corner under a skylight, Elena stopped. Here? She asked. This is prime lighting. Exactly, Margaret said. He doesn't know how good his work looks in sunlight yet. He will. Elena traced the outline on the miniature model with her fingertip. You really believe in him? I believe in art that remembers people, Margaret answered simply. The rest is decoration. Something about that sentence landed deep in Elena's chest. She nodded slowly. Then we'll make sure the world remembers him too. Margaret gave her a look of quiet approval. Careful, Elena. That kind of sincerity is contagious. People might start mistaking you for an idealist. Elena smirked. I'll risk it. They shared another laugh before Margaret's assistant approached with a tablet. Mrs. Gray, the Dravens confirmed their attendance for the gala preview. They've requested placement near the central aisle. Margaret rolled her eyes heavenward. Of course they have. Tell them the aisle is reserved for art, not arrogance. The assistant hesitated. Should I actually tell them that? No, just smile and say we'll do our best. That's what diplomacy means. Smile and do something entirely different. Elena laughed outright this time. You realize my mother will find a way to rearrange the furniture mid-event if she dislikes her seat. Then we'll nail the chairs to the floor, Margaret said dryly. Now, where were we? Believing in art that remembers people, Elena said softly. Margaret looked at her for a long second, and the humor gentled into something thoughtful. Yes. Don't forget that, Elena. The world will try to make you believe that money moves culture, but it's people like you who keep it alive. The sincerity startled her. Compliments from her mother came wrapped in instructions. From Margaret, they felt like trust. She wanted to ask about Ethan, who he was, why he mattered, but before she could, a new commotion broke out near the entrance. A courier stood there, damp from the drizzle outside, holding an envelope sealed with gold wax, the same wax Elena had noticed on the mysterious letters Margaret received occasionally. Margaret crossed the room, took the envelope, and dismissed the courier with a tip and a nod. Elena pretended to study a model while watching out of the corner of her eye. Margaret slit the seal with a practiced motion, scanned the letter, and her expression changed. Just slightly. Not fear, not anger, but awareness, like a chord struck deep inside her. She folded the note carefully, slid it into her pocket, and when she turned back to Elena, her face was composed again. Sorry, business never sleeps. No worries, Elena said lightly, though curiosity pricked at her. Anything interesting? Only the usual, Margaret replied too smoothly. Deadlines pretending to be emergencies. Elena smiled politely, but thought, that's not the usual. Margaret tucked the envelope out of sight and returned to her clipboard as though nothing had interrupted the rhythm of the morning. But the calm had changed flavor. It carried the quiet tension of someone keeping a secret that hummed just under the surface. Elena followed her toward the east hallway where the prototype displays stood waiting to be evaluated. Assistants trailed behind with fabric samples, light gels, and the slightly panicked energy of people who'd drunk too much espresso and not enough hope. "Let's start with the transitional exhibit," Margaret said briskly. "This corridor will hold works from the up-and-coming artists. Our bridge between the known and the new." The phrase made Elena pause. "Bridge," she echoed. It was the same word that had haunted her all week since she'd first seen Ethan S. portfolio. "Everything lately seems to come back to bridges." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "A good theme for the season. The world's divided enough. Art might as well build something between the halves." They moved down the hall, examining canvases propped along the wall. Elena stopped at one, a study of two figures rendered only by their shadows touching. "This one feels honest," she murmured, "like it doesn't care who's watching." "That's why I bought it," Margaret said. "Honesty ages better than technique." Elena smiled, running her hand just above the canvas. "My mother would faint if she heard you say that." "Then we'll say it quietly," Margaret replied, and the faintest trace of mischief crossed her refined face. "Tell me, are you bringing anyone to the gala preview?" Elena made a face. "You mean Gregory?" Margaret's silence was diplomatic but eloquent. "I'll attend alone," Elena said after a moment. "Less chance of small talk about yachts." "Good girl," Margaret said softly, then corrected herself. "Good woman. You're learning the difference." They paused near a window overlooking the avenue. Below, the city pulsed with motion. Drivers weaving through rain-slick streets, pedestrians juggling umbrellas and ambition. Solterra always looked like a painting that refused to dry. Elena pressed a hand to the glass. "Sometimes I wonder if anyone down there knows how much polish it takes to make everything here look effortless." "Effortless," Margaret repeated almost to herself. "The most expensive illusion there is." For a moment, the two women stood together in companionable silence, watching the world move. Then Margaret's assistant appeared again, whispering something that made her frown. "The lighting contractor canceled," Margaret said. "Apparently, a flu epidemic in their department." Margaret's assistant hurried in again, murmuring something that made her frown. "The lighting contractor canceled," Margaret said. "Apparently a flu epidemic in their department." Elena groaned. "Of course. A perfectly timed disaster." She thought for a moment. "I'll call Sophia's company. She's been working with a tech design firm that handles large-scale events. If anyone can find backup lighting at short notice, it's her." Margaret looked relieved. "You mean the friend who turns every setback into a party theme?" "That's the one," Elena said, smiling. "She knows everyone who's ever plugged in a spotlight." "Then call her," Margaret replied, amused. "Women like that keep civilization running," Elena laughed. "I'll tell her you said that. She'll have it embroidered on a pillow." Margaret turned toward the planning board again. "If Naomi's reliable, have her send someone by tomorrow. We need backup technicians anyway." Elena made a quick note. "I'll reach out." "Good. Now, about the guest list." Margaret trailed off, scanning columns of names. "The Dravens, of course, will have their front row seats, but I'm moving you to the curator's table." Elena looked up. "The curator's table? That's for people who actually know what they're talking about." "Exactly." Margaret smiled. "You'll fit right in once you realize nobody actually knows what they're talking about." Elena laughed, shaking her head. "You're impossible. That's my job description." They spent the next hour fine-tuning the layout, switching sculptures, adjusting lighting angles, making jokes about donors who wanted their names printed larger than their contributions justified. The rhythm between them was easy now, a duet of sarcasm and sincerity. By late afternoon, the clouds outside deepened into pewter. The rain began again, gentle but steady, drumming on the skylights above the hall. Elena perched on the edge of a display case, stretching her legs. Do you ever get tired of being perfect? Margaret glanced over, amused. Constantly. But imperfection doesn't photograph well. Maybe that's why Ethan's work feels alive, Elena said. It's full of mistakes he didn't bother to hide. Margaret's eyes softened. Maybe that's why it matters. The rain thickened. Staff began packing equipment, their laughter echoing faintly through the hall. Margaret gathered her notes, then looked at Elena. Walk with me to the car? Of course. They moved through the lobby, their reflections gliding across the marble floor. Near the exit, the courier from earlier reappeared, holding an umbrella and looking uncertain. He gave Margaret a respectful nod, then hurried away into the storm. Elena hesitated. Another delivery? Nothing urgent, Margaret said quickly. A confirmation about transport crates. But as she spoke, Elena noticed a faint shimmer of gold wax on the envelope now tucked beneath Margaret's ledger. The same golden seal she'd seen before, identical to the one Naomi had once shown her in a magazine photo, a symbol of an anonymous patron funding emerging artists. Elena's curiosity sharpened. She wanted to ask, wanted to peel back the mystery, but she swallowed the urge. Margaret was many things, but not careless. If she wanted something known, she would say it herself. Outside, the rain painted the city silver. Margaret's driver opened the door. Will you be all right getting home? She asked Elena. I'll manage, Elena said. Solterra taxis are built for aquatic conditions. Margaret smiled faintly. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be chaos disguised as grace. That's the gala motto, isn't it? Precisely. Elena watched her step into the car and disappear into traffic, taillights dissolving into mist. The street felt strangely quiet once she was gone. She stood under the awning, replaying the day, the name change, the talk of the Veralia artist, Margaret's guarded reaction. She finally pulled out her phone and texted Sophia. You still in touch with that tech friend of yours? 3 dots blinked. Then Naomi's reply came, Sam? Yeah. Why? Elena stared at the screen for a long moment before typing, Never mind, just curious. Hope his work's going well. She pocketed the phone and stepped into the rain. Back at the Gray and Carmber's offices, Margaret sat alone in her study, the city's glow pressing against the windows. She unlocked a drawer, pulled out the golden-sealed envelope from earlier, and unfolded the letter. Inside were 2 lines in elegant handwriting. The thread moves as planned. The artist is unaware. Continue the distance until Solterra. Margaret sighed and rubbed her temples. Always the riddles, she murmured. Then she took out a smaller envelope already prepared, addressed to an assistant in Veralia. She slipped inside a new note written in her own hand. Ensure the invitation reaches Ethan Hawthorne before week's end. And for heaven's sake, make it look routine. She sealed it with the same wax, watching the golden mark cool. Her reflection shimmered in the metal desk surface, composed, deliberate, but not entirely at ease. Soon, she whispered, half to herself. Soon he'll stand where he was meant to stand. Outside, thunder rolled faintly across the city, a low promise rather than a threat. Later that night, Elena sat by her window, sketching mindlessly in her notebook. The rain had eased to a drizzle. She drew a bridge, 2 sides reaching, almost touching. But she left the middle unfinished. The pencil paused in her hand. She thought of Margaret's unreadable smile, the mysterious letters, and the name that kept circling her mind like a half-remembered melody. Ethan Hawthorne. Somewhere out there, she knew, that same name was sitting on an envelope sealed in gold. The city lights flickered as if winking at her realization. She whispered, Maybe some bridges build themselves.